Dunstan Bruce is a film director, playwright, lead singer with Interrobang, and former lead singer with international pranksters and hitmakers Chumbawamba. He's also a great friend of Rockaway, and many of the people here have known him for more years than they care to remember. He's always an interesting listen, so sit back and hear what he has to say. You've directed quite a few films, including a Sham 69 documentary about their tour of China.
In 2009, I had the opportunity to go to China with Sham 69, and it was Sham 69 without Jimmy Percy, but with Dave Parsons, and at that point they had a vocalist called Tim V, and they'd been invited over by this guy called Ray, who had a band, still got a band called The No Name. Ray had paid for Sham 69 to go over, and so they'd got in touch and said, "Do you want to come and make a film about us touring in China?" So I took the opportunity to go. I went with another cameraman. There was two of us went, and we travelled around a large part of China, making a documentary about Sham 69's tour. But what was fascinating, it wasn't so much the band, Sham 69, they were just like a bunch of middle-aged men who complained about everything. But the youth of China and this sort of burgeoning punk scene that was going on there, that was absolutely fascinating. That was really interesting. Because it wasn't like they wanted to change the world. They just wanted to rebel against the previous generation in a way. It was very stylistic and a lot of slogans, but it wasn't necessarily anti-state, which I guess was quite dangerous to be out there. But there was this idea that there was a world, out west, that was something that they were like hankering after. So it was fascinating that all these young kids were coming along to see these 50-something men play these songs from 40 years ago.
Were they aware of Sham 69's music?
They appeared to be, yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, not that they knew when they were playing a new one and when they were playing an old one, but there's obviously some classics that they all went crazy for.
Yeah. Boys.
Yeah, If the Kids Are United, stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, they did them all, they were doing them all. And they were, they were a funny version of Sham 69 because they were very, they seemed very at odds with each other, and they weren't that impressed with being in China. But as soon as they got on stage, they were brilliant. They really gave it their all, and they put everything into it. Even when we were playing some weird show actually, I was going to say the middle of nowhere, but a lot of their cities are in the middle of nowhere, I guess. And they're still like 2 or 3 million population. But they'd be playing to, like quite a small audience in a weird club, but they'd still put everything into it. So I was pretty impressed with their performance as a band, even though they weren't that engaging as documentary subjects. But Ray, people like Ray, who was the organizer, I mean, he was gold. He was absolutely brilliant. He's still going. It's amazing. He's still doing stuff. He's still playing, and he's still got that punk spirit. So it's brilliant to see.
Were you there for quite a while? I mean, I've no conception of what China can be like. I only ever see it on the news, so that's my view of it, really.
It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. We were there for 2 weeks. And we toured around by train. There was this sort of huge middle class that I was not expecting at all. I was expecting, a sort of a hierarchy, like a small elite, and a lot of poverty. And it wasn't like that at all. It sort of blew my mind a little bit culturally. because there was a lot going on, and it was a bit like, it reminded me like the first time I ever went to Japan, which was in the late 80s, where there was like this cultural impact where a lot of stuff they had was way ahead of what we were, of what we had, which was weird because it's not what I thought China was going to be. So it was quite fascinating. Yeah, like this huge sort of like young middle class aspiring generation sort of thing going on against this sort of these cities that were quite identikit, similar. You couldn't, like you could never tell the difference between one city to the next in a way.
Yeah,
because there was so much new build stuff going on, high rise stuff, that a lot of the cities looked quite similar, and so it was like I was surprised by the amount of construction, the amount of relative wealth within this sort of what I regarded as a sort of a middle class. What was really fascinating about it as well was that it was easier to get in and out of China than it is to get in and out of the United States. It was crazy. It was totally crazy.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I have issues in that area myself. You also did a documentary about the Levelers and one or two other things. So how did you get into film directing? I mean, did you study it, or did you just think, I've seen a load of films, anybody can do it? Because I think there's
I did think that, but I got into loads of trouble for thinking that.
I think I've always felt there's three things that anybody could do and be just as good as anybody else: direct a film, be Prime Minister of Britain, or be the manager of the England football team.
Well, what I did was my partner at the time, Daisy, she's a brilliant documentary maker. And she makes a lot of she teaches documentary now, but at the time she was making a lot of sort of social issue sort of documentaries that involved a lot of been building up very strong relationships and trust with her contributors, and so she took great care in doing that. And I stupidly said one day, "Oh, I think I'll make a documentary. It looks really easy." She was furious, and it wasn't until years later that I publicly apologized, because I just thought that is so ridiculous that I said that. But I didn't have this sense that I could do it though. When it was Daisy who got the offer to go to China with Sham 69, and she just said, why the fuck would I want to go to China with Sham 69? And so I was like, well, I'll go. Yeah. We'd set up a production company. We set up our own documentary production company, me and Daisy. And so I just got the opportunity to go, and I just thought, yeah, I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to try.
Yeah.
And then weirdly, when I came back, I had to find an editor to edit the film, and this guy Jim Scott had got in touch with Daisy, and he'd wanted to work with Daisy because she has a very good reputation, and Daisy didn't need an editor at the time. So I wrote back to Jim and said, look, Jim, Daisy's not available, but I'm actually looking for an editor myself. And so I met him in that, and we started working together, and so it was his first feature doc, and it was my first feature doc, and we just learned the whole process together and made this documentary called This Band Is So Gorgeous. I'm really good friends with Jim. He worked on I Get Knocked Down as well. Years later, I said to him, Jim, you were sort of disappointed. You were a bit disappointed that you had to work with me and not with Daisy, weren't you? And he just went, I wasn't a bit disappointed. I was like, oh, right, okay, sorry.
Devastated.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's very much within the spirit of how we all started off in music, wasn't it? Here's three chords, now form a band. And
it was pretty much. We just had these little these little Sony A1 cameras where you put cartridges in.
Yeah.
We just like, I was with a cameraman. A friend who lives on the same street as me, who's an actual professional cameraman, came with me. So it was great to have him there. But I mean, we were just working it out as we went along. It was quite an easy thing to do because we were just filming a band on tour, so it had its own timeline in a way. You know, it was, the story was, you know, that they went to China. It was weird. They did some gigs. It went a bit wrong, and then they triumphed at the end. You know, we did a classic.
Well, classic structure, isn't it?
It was, yeah. It was that classic structure. We just did it. We just made it.
Yeah.
You know, you just.
Obviously, you did the tub thumping film. Anything else in the pipeline, film projects or ones that you can talk about now? Or
do you know what? Well, yeah, but I mean, what happened with having done I Get Knocked Down? I think I'd always been leading up to wanting to make that film. And like when I made the Levelers one, I made one about the Levelers called A Curious Life. I felt as though I was working out how to tell a story of a band sort of thing. And I learned a lot of stuff from making that really helped me as I went in to make I Get Knocked Down. So it was really good. But then obviously I met Sophie Robinson, who's co-director, and she's like got loads of years of experience. So that really made it a lot easier to make the whole film. But since making it, I haven't thought, oh, right, I want to go and make another documentary. I feel as though I was working towards that. And then obviously on the back of that, we did the one-man show. And so that came out of the film in a way. And I did say to Sophie, I must have told you this. I said to Sophie when we finished I Get Knocked Down, I said, so that went really well. Do you think we'll make another film together? And she just went, nah. I was like, what? And she said, look, to be honest, I think it's not that I think you're not any good at making film, but I think you're better in front of a camera. You're better on stage and stuff. And that was sort of why we did the one-man show in a way. And so now we're trying to write a TV series, which has come out of the film and the one-man show. And it has some similar themes, but it's got a whole new ideas as well. And that, again, that's something I've never done before in my life.
Is that about a band, or is it centered around music? Or
it's got an autobiographical element to it, but it's also about toxic masculinity and teenagers being affected by what they see on the internet, and people like Andrew Tate and Joe Rogan and people like that. And so it's like got a family. It's got like a family thing. It's about me and my son, but it's also about different versions of me. It's so that all sounds quite vague, but it's still in the development. We've started writing it, and we know what it is. But when I said that years ago about I could easily make a documentary, and I was really cocky about it. I'm not as cocky now about doing this. This is really hard.
Because documentary is kind of, you film what's in front of you to an extent, and there's all sorts of ways you can do it and different spins you can put on it, but basically representing something that's already there. Whereas with a fictionalized piece that has to engage people, have characters, have three-dimensional characters, hopefully, that interact with each other, and narrative arcs and that's
all that which I've never done before. I've never done it before. No, so it's quite a challenge. Have you written a book, Steve?
I wrote a book which was basically it was a book of all the lyrics from Zounds songs, and each song had a little piece of prose that went with it, and some of that was autobiographical. I wrote this when we were on tour in Germany, and this happened, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Or like for Subvert, which is about the idea of working. I wrote quite a bit about my attitudes to work when I left school, and, so that was sort of like a little bit more of a philosophical thing. Dirty Squatters, obviously I could write about the squatting scene and when we were living in Hackney and all that. So, but
that all came out of your lived experience. basically.
Exactly, yeah. And a bit like you with the film, after I wrote the book, I thought, I really enjoyed that. And a lot of people said they really liked it, even people that had never heard of Zounds. I'll write another book. But I found I'd probably exhausted my favourite subject, which was me. Think, what the fuck else am I interested in?
Do you know what? I mean, there's obviously a thing with musicians, because I get accused of that all the time. Like, I like, you know, like I laugh at it myself, that, you know, when people say, what are you doing? And they go, what's it about? Every time I have to go, it's about me. But you're right about what you know, I suppose.
Yeah, it's always about you. Even in the sort of like political songs and everything, you're writing those because it's something that you've experienced or want to experience. So, and I mean, the other thing you say, I've had a go at writing sort of like novels and this, that, and the other. But I find with the things I've got to say, I can usually say them in 2 verses and a chorus, you know, and if I've really developed it, maybe a middle 8. But beyond that, you know.
I know what you mean. I was talking to someone. I was at a gig last night. I was talking to a friend of mine who's written a novel, and I was like, oh, you know, I'm trying to write something myself, you know, something I've never done before. And I was like, it's made me realize how easy it is to write lyrics. You know, just work out, you know, how many words a line are.
Yeah, and that's it. And because they have to rhyme, you've only got certain options anyway.
So I go to that rhyme zone or whatever.
Yeah, so I'm surprised I haven't seen you in there.
and now I'm trying to write something else. It's just like I can't rely on those things anymore.
No. How did you feel about the response to the film?
I tell you what was it's brilliant. Like, because we did a massive tour, we did a massive cinema tour, and that was sort of because we couldn't sell it to the mainstream. Nobody wanted to buy it, ironically. So we had the time and the space to go out and tour the film, and that was that. Even though it was frustrating that, you know, we're still massively in debt with the film because nobody's bought it. It did mean that we had a fantastic time traveling around the country and showing the film and doing Q&As, you know, afterwards. And I as you know, sometimes Q&As can be as important and as much fun as the actual film. And I just thought it was a really good way of connecting with people around the country, you know, who were either documentary lovers or old Chumbawamba fans and stuff like that. And that felt really good, creating this sort of space where lots of people came together and we could talk about, you know, how we felt about the world. Because it's not a straightforward music documentary. It gives people who were never in the band a chance to talk about how they feel about the world as well, which I thought was something that we tried to achieve with the film, was to make it have universal themes.
I read a review in The Guardian of the film, which was very nice. It was saying, you know, I really didn't ever get this band and probably felt quite meanly towards them, but actually here is this lovely film, a lovely story, and you know,
we were really pleased with that review that we got in The Guardian. It sort of meant a lot when people get it, especially when critics get it. You know, that's sort of it's rewarding in a way, because obviously, you know, I've spent. I mean, part of the film is about people slagging off Chumbawamba, and I've spent 25 years in that band getting criticised by everybody. So it's really nice to create something that you know, a lot of people are saying, oh, actually, you know, this is interesting, and it's not a straightforward music documentary, and I think that's really important that it's not. And I think that's part of the thing why I haven't been inspired to go and do another music doc, because if I did, I would want it to be different again.
Yeah.
And not like a straightforward, because there's so many straightforward music documentaries now.
Just endless things where, you know, the same old stories get trotted out over and over again. But yeah, and the film, I think, was very much kind of in the spirit of how Chumbawamba, you know, developed, because they developed out of that anarcho punk scene, which, let's face it, was quite monochrome, and in some ways, you know, got a little bit tedious in a way with identikit bands. And I mean, I don't think the original bands were like that, but as it went on, and Chumbawamba managed to kind of like break out of that, you know, ghetto, some people might call it, and you know,
I definitely, I think we felt that as a band, that we didn't, that we initially being involved in that anarcho punk scene was brilliant, because it just, we found our sort of community in a way. But then after a few years, it felt like it was starting to get a bit inward looking. And as soon as you stepped outside of that, you got criticised. And it just felt as though we sort of needed to move on and do different stuff. And we always wanted to be outward looking. We always wanted to talk to the rest of the world, and not just to the same people over and over again, I guess. We were always trying to find ways of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you were really successful, because I know with Zounds, we were always in this, it was always a fucking dilemma for us, because we'd been on Crass, people expected us to be a certain way, and when a load of stoned, bumbling sort of anarcho hippies turned up, it wasn't always really what they wanted, and it was like other people that might have liked what we were doing wouldn't come because of the association. So and I'm sure that's why some hostility towards Chumbawamba from the mainstream, because actually they hated all that crass stuff and anarchy stuff, because they didn't understand it, and it didn't fit in with, you know, the various kind of like fashions and trends that
it's weird that we didn't play together more than what we did, actually.
Well, to be honest, we split up in 1982.
Oh, right, that's why.
So, yeah, you hadn't even started. The first I heard of you, some bloke came around my house and had a Chumbawamba record and said, like, oh, this is the big new thing in the anarcho scene. He played it. He said, yeah, it's this bunch of people, and they're called Chumbawamba because they were in Paris and they saw some bongo player chanting Chumbawamba, Chumbawamba.
Hey, that's the right reason. That's the real reason. That's amazing. There's so many versions of that stuff, of why we're called Chumbawamba, that you know the right one.
Which one's Chumba? Just on politics in music, then what are we all doing?
I had this conversation yesterday, actually, with someone. I were doing a talk yesterday. You know them BIM schools. You know, like they sort of like these organizations that are like trying to teach young people how to be in the music industry.
Oh, yeah.
So I was doing. I've got a friend who works at one, and I was doing I did a slideshow about my experience of of being in the music industry. And right at the end, somebody said, "Do you think we?" Well, she said, "Do you think music's do you think all music's political?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I think it is. I think not just that whether it's left wing or right wing. I think all music is political. That it's you can't be neutral. It's not a situation." And then we got on to discussing how much politics there was in music nowadays, and that was quite interesting, because there were young people there who were into like grime and drill and stuff like that, and then there were young women there who were involved in this like loud women movement. All their experience is that music is political. It's all it's all political, and and there's a lot of people in those scenes saying stuff. I guess what's happened is that maybe that's less mainstream than there isn't The jam or the
I
specials.
was just going to say the jam or the special. So maybe there aren't that many because we both thought of the same two groups. But yeah, but I mean, even like, you know, in the early 80s, you know, Frankie Goes to Hollywood. He weren't a political group, but they did Two Tribes, and Paul Morley had everybody parading around in t-shirts saying, "Arm the," you know, Frankie says, "Arm the unemployed." You know,
Yeah.
says, "Support the miners." You know, Frankie says, "No to Cruz." The world is different, is it? And everything is completely fractured, I suppose. So
I think it is, yeah. But I thought it was interesting that these young people were saying that they did think they'd had to do this. They'd had to do this discussion where half of them had to take the stance that music is not political, or and the other half had to say that music was political. And basically, the people who were there were saying they found it really difficult to have to argue that music was not political. And I thought that was really encouraging. That there is a younger generation that are thinking. Maybe they're not thinking in the same ways that we thought, and that's great, because we're old fuddy duddies who maybe don't know, are out of touch.
What records, if any, or groups influenced you politically? I mean, when you were growing up, was there?
Yeah, so I came through punk. I'm 62, so I was around in the 70s to be young enough to have been into bands like the first gig I ever went to was Judas Priest.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So that was where I was at before punk came along. Then punk came along, totally blew my mind. But I think I were like the bands that really that got me out of that sort of world of of guitar solos and decadence and all that sort of stuff. But the bands that really sort of like hit home with me were more like the second wave of punk bands, like Gang of Four and the Mekons and the Pop Group. It was all bands like that I was like more interested in a way of saying something political with music that I thought was that I just thought was more interesting. Because I think that 3-chord thing was a brilliant, liberating statement. That's all you needed. But then I know there was bands like the Ramones that like took that to such a fine art, and I still think they're a brilliant band. But a lot of that music I got really tired of really quickly, and I was sort of looking for other stuff. And then because we were all living together, other people's influences come in, and then you start listening to folk music, or you start listening to Gil Scott-Heron, or like you just have all these different influences swirling around at the same time. I think what a lot of that stuff taught me in particular was like stuff like Them and Last Poets and stuff like that was that you didn't have to. I think it was a really important lesson that we learned as a band, is that maybe shouting in people's faces wasn't the best way to try and make a point.
Yeah.
And like sometimes using a melody was a better idea, or using humor. Those were better ways of trying to engage with people.
You were living in Leeds, so Gang of Four, the Mekons, they were, bands.
Yeah, that was sort of one of the reasons why I went to Leeds, really. I wanted to be in Leeds was because those sort of, I suppose you'd call them agitprop bands back then, because of bands like them, and Delta 5 were in Leeds as well. They just seemed like really really interesting what they were doing in music. I've just been listening to the Au Pairs today, actually, and I just think bands like that that were around that were saying really, really hard-hitting stuff, but music that I just found really engaging. I thought that was
the Au Pairs were really good, actually. I got to know the drummer and the manager of the Au Pairs quite soon after they split up, and I mean they were all sort of quite committed, but there was this thing like, they've got a record company deal, and and the record company are sort of pushing them to go more kind of just make it a bit more commercial and soften things a bit, and and those things inevitably lead to tensions, and often
of course
just split up, rather than grow.
That's a difficult thing, and I suppose that was something that we had to work through as well, with with tub thumping. Really, is
Yeah.
work out where that we could get it to work for us, I guess.
Yeah.
And then it didn't work for us, and so we sort of withdrew in a way.
So what happened? Presumably, when Tub Thumping was out, you were doing a lot of big shows. Who were going to the shows? Still the older audience, people just coming in expecting to hear Tub Thumping. You know?
Yeah, there was a lot, especially in America. We had to restructure the set. So Tub Thumping was the last song we did in the set because that was the only way we could get people to stay at the gig. Yeah. So we'd like, right, well, let's just do it as the last song, so they have to watch everything else before they get their reward of Tub Thumping.
Yeah.
And when that period was over and we went back to doing smaller shows, we were really aware of the fact that we'd lost a lot of our fan base, that we'd previously built up over 15 years.
Are you doing any more touring, either with the film or with the live show?
No, Interrobang are up and running again.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, we're doing a second album, so we're going to start. We're starting to do shows with Interrobang. Yeah.
Okay. Look, maybe we can do a part 2 of this sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. Okay. I think that would be fantastic. So, end of part 1, and we'll do it all again, Dunstan.
All right. Okay. I'll speak to you soon, Steve.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thanks.